I'm Rene Bouchard, Director of Development for the Cinema Arts Center.
And I'm Tawney, Director of Publicity and Promotions for the Cinema Arts Center.
And we're here with Charlotte Skye, co-founder and co-director of the Cinema Arts Center, to talk about something that is fundamental to our mission. What's the difference between seeing a movie here with other members of our community and seeing a movie at home or in any other setting? So I kind of want to start at the beginning. When you and Vic Skolnick founded the cinema in 1973, you chose the name New Community Cinema. So your aim was not just to make sure there was access to film outside of the mainstream, but to build a community around film. Can you talk a little bit about the community building aspect of the cinema's earliest days?
The whole idea of finding ways to introduce film that had not been shown very much on Long Island to an audience that we hoped would really respond well, and of course that's the ultimate. But we also felt that it was a way for people to come together who were like-minded, who had similar interests in film, and could enjoy not only the company and the discussions that followed the film, but they could find ways to interact with each other. And that was a very important part of it, that the cinema's connection became really with the community. So I think that was the ultimate aim of it. We really didn't think so much of the money part, but not that it turned out it wouldn't be urgent and important, but we started, believe it or not, we started a membership where people would just make a small contribution, and then they could come in like for $1. It was just the beginning of the idea of membership and connecting with what the cinema really needed, which was really developing an audience more than the money. Although the money part came later, and we did have something that was more Vic's introduction. He liked the idea of having tea. We had the kind of system where we had to change reels because we only had one projector, which we borrowed from the library, and therefore we had to change reels. So when you had a break for this so-called intermission, it was a way for us to, have coffee and tea, and people would donate whatever they wanted towards paying for that, which was not much. But whoever wanted to was on an honor system. They weren't charged a fee. Even though it was a nuisance, it turned out to be actually a good way for people to kind of mingle together while we were changing reels. So it became one more aspect of community building, even though it was not the ideal way to show a film.
So the evolution of our receptions, instead of it, now it's a post-screening reception. It used to be a mid-screening reception. And everyone would kind of, commiserate. And it was kind of the foundation of the community understanding that it was an engagement, that they would support us and they would have this venue.
Yeah.
How did you do your first outreach to get people to know what was happening?
Oh, my. We had a very basic, it was certainly an unsophisticated way of getting an audience to know about what we were doing. We had these, I guess you'd call a mimeograph, where you made stencils.
Oh, wow.
And you'd put them on a machine that you then turned out hundreds or as many as we needed. And we just had to find a way always to make copies, more copies than we could do with the mimeograph. And there was someone who worked with us. Her name was Nancy O'Mara, and she was a student. And so she had access to a copying machine, and then we would just turn out hundreds. And then it was just a matter of walking everywhere and just putting them as many places as we could find that would accept them. And that's how we really got the word out. And we just pinned them up on bulletin boards and just leave them every place. And people were good about it. At first there was a little suspicion. What is this? That they never heard of the films we were doing. What exactly are they doing? But then gradually the community vendors that had businesses got to know us, and they allowed us to put the flyers everywhere.
And now today our program guide is all over the place in kind of the same way.
Yes.
So even though we have, Facebook and all of the social media and the email and the website and all these other ways for people to discover us, we still have our print program all over town, just like in the beginning.
Yeah. And we were also lucky. There was a printing press that was donated to us by a company that was going out of business. So we learned how to use the printing press, and we could just turn out all this stuff all the time. The only trouble is, it broke down occasionally, and you had to really, learn how to repair it. But that was a way we really got out a lot of print stuff, which, by the way, we donated to the United Farm Workers out east. We donated our printing press to them. Last I heard, they really got a lot of use out of it. So,
That's great.
Yeah, it's the early humble beginnings.
So, as we're talking about how independent films, they weren't widely available in people's homes at the time when the cinema started, and then the advent of a VCR came in the 80s, and then so on TV and cable television and all that. So, can you talk about how the cinema grappled with all of these new inventions and, and how seeing it with an audience in a theater was most important?
That was a big crisis when the VCRs first appeared. And of course, we knew that people would certainly want to be able to have access to ways that they could watch films at home. But we knew that would be a real downturn for us. And it was a disaster. Our membership, which had been climbing, really declined seriously. And we were thinking, are people going to come back? Are we going to be able to be a substitute for what people could get at home? But the good thing was, one good thing, was that a lot of the films we were showing were not always available on VCR. At least the early times they are now. And so we had that advantage. But however, gradually, I think people didn't really want to just be home all the time. They wanted to get out of their houses, whether it was because they didn't always want to watch with their families or just not being housebound. So people started coming back and coming out again. It was a revival. I mean, we were just stunned. We didn't know that would happen. But I think people miss having other people around. I think people missed coming to a place. In a way, it's a little bit like an inner sanctum. You come into a dark room, you're not going to get, hopefully, any interference that you do at home. You don't get the phones ringing, somebody at your door, family interfering. There's always something that comes up while you don't have total just privacy. And I think what people realize, you come into this room, it gets dark. You just are there with just you. Maybe you were there with a partner, and what's about to take place. And it's a much more exciting idea that you're going to enter a whole new world, which at home you can't. I mean, how do you have that at home? You don't just block out all the lights, all that heat, all the lights blocked out. Everything is focused just on the screen. And you enter into this world, I'd like to say of make-believe, but it's a world that transfers you and transforms you. And that is something, an experience that can't be duplicated just on your home screen or your home environment. So that was what I think people discovered. And also, they missed the social life that you have. I mean, you don't want to just always hang around with your family. And I think, even people who might have a day of watching where they might invite neighbors in or friends, I think they liked the idea of the communication you have with people who are there for the same purpose and experience, not that you always experience the same thing, for an experience that you can share afterwards. Of course, we always had the advantage. In the early years, we had one advantage that we don't today. Filmmakers who were working in 16 millimeter would carry their films around with them. That was before the 35 became widely available even to independent filmmakers. But independent filmmakers would go around the whole country, and they would usually notify us when they were going to be in our area. So they had like a travel sheet, and they would send it, and then we'd know who was coming when, and we could advertise it. And the filmmaker, of course, wants to connect with an audience because they weren't going to get their 16 millimeter films into any of the plexes or any of the mainstream theaters. So they knew the work that they were doing would have an audience. And then they really developed this audience by going, as I say, they could take their 16 print everywhere. We would then have the filmmakers present. They would be able to talk to the audience. The audience was very excited about that because they hadn't had that experience watching films in any of the mainstream theaters. They could actually talk to the filmmaker. They could actually have a communication with them, why they did the film, how it evolved, how it affected them. Sometimes it would be criticism about the film, which was okay. The filmmakers accepted that, you know. And it's the way that women had the opportunity to have their work shown, because they could show it where they couldn't show it in any of the theaters. They could show it in the cinema, and they were working in 16 millimeter because these women were finally learning how to use equipment, which they couldn't before. So therefore, this was like an avenue for them. And we had many women filmmakers who were able to really come together. And this became a very important part of the women's movement.
Even though today there's still there's underrepresentation of women, still today it's a serious issue. The Cinema Arts Center was really able to be pioneers in moving the bar and really moving the metric on that and making sure that women had exposure. When you were talking about the filmmakers coming, I was thinking how interesting it was, how kind of a two-way street it is, because it's not just that the audience gets to have exposure to the filmmaker, but the filmmaker gets to have exposure to the audience. You know, because sometimes one of the most exciting things about going to the movies is listening to everyone make comments on their way out the door. You know, it's so interesting to hear how everyone was responding, and to actually be the film artist and get to hear all that and then get to interact with people and answer questions is something, you know, remarkable that we still do here.
We don't have it as much because, the 16 millimeter films hardly ever used. And, although now I think there's certainly, DVDs and there's the digital. So, I mean, that's another revolution that has changed things, as we all know. But I think the filmmakers really had access to audiences, that you were just saying. And that was extremely important because it also provided an income for them, because a lot of independent filmmakers relied on the income they would get from the theaters, and they also relied on grants from the National Endowment, from New York State Council, and from other resources that could give filmmakers an opportunity to continue their work. So that was a very important part, and this was all before Sundance.
Right.
So it was an avenue that was available. I mean, now it's pretty commonplace. But
another aspect of all of coming to the Cinema to See program is that it's curated. You're not flipping through and deciding what you're going to see. You know, you curate a program. You've selected a program. It's, it's designed. And I think that that's a really, important aspect. And a lot of people will just come and see something that they've never heard of because it's here. If it's been selected by you, they know it's worthwhile and they put themselves in the seat. And I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of the unique position you're in as a programmer as it relates to the difference between seeing a film in isolation and seeing a film with an audience. Because a lot of times you're screening films at home by yourself, at your desk, streaming on the computer. So you see a film in isolation, and then you come and see the same film again with the audience there. And I want to hear you talk a little bit about how seeing the film with an audience changes your impressions and your perceptions of that film that you already viewed.
Well, one of the important parts of what I considered my quote-unquote work was really I hoped it would really make people think more about not only just what they were seeing, but how they were affected by it? Did it make a difference in their lives? Did it cause them to be different when they left than when they first came in? And how much was that difference? I always thought that the only way that people could change things that would make them think about whatever it was that they were experiencing, and that therefore would it change their state of mind. My thought always was the cinema going to be some kind of a force for that? And I always felt, and I used to talk to Vic about it, I said, do you think we really made any difference in people's lives? Do you think it really was something that changed their thinking? And I always thought, no, it probably didn't. But then I would get a lot of feedback from audiences that said how much it did change their lives, how much it did make them think about things, how much that experience made a difference in how they even looked at other films. Because Vic, who was a history teacher, Vic insisted on giving an introduction to all the films. Yes. So that he always said, films did not exist just as something that just got placed there. He said it comes out of people's ideas. And therefore, how do those ideas really affect what people are seeing and how they're interpreting it? So he felt that if they knew the background about how this film evolved, that would mean a lot to how the film got experienced. So there are a lot of people who loved that, but there are some who didn't. Said, right. I came to see a movie. I didn't come to hear somebody give me a lecture. So that part was something that Vic would not give up. And it proved he was right. People did come to a different appreciation of what they were seeing and how it came to be that this film does not just appear. It comes from somebody's ideas and backgrounds. Where are they? And what kind of ideas are they bringing out? So I think that what I thought was maybe not going to happen or could happen, did happen. People did start to express how much it meant to them to find views that they didn't know about. I know we always worried about, so-called controversial films. There were a lot of people who were objecting, not a lot. There were some people who felt we were getting, public grants and it was tax money, and we were showing films that they objected to, and they would contact the grant agencies, and they would sometimes I would hear about it, and then I would get feedback from some of the people in the granting agencies, and said they sent a letter to whoever complained and said, "Oh, you should feel lucky that there's something in your neighborhood that is offering you something that you can't get anywhere else." We were great. Lucky. We had some very progressive people in the grant agencies, because it could have been just the opposite. They could have just shut it down, and they certainly, with their closing down of the finance part, could definitely have been affected us.
Absolutely. I mean, the member support and the annual support is really vital to us, but the grant support is also vital. It all has to work together. But we're absolutely allowed to have a point of view, and I'm glad that you were never shy about it.
Yeah, no, someone had asked us if a group, he said, did you feel that when you had criticism that you backed down? And I said, luckily, I shouldn't say luckily, we just never did. And people would call and say, I'm canceling my membership. And I would not say it to them, but I felt good riddance, But there are people who were objecting, because we were doing gay films long before there was this whole revolution that took place. I mean, we were doing gay films from the very beginning when we started. And there were a lot of people who were objecting to not only the gay films, but we started doing the Gay Film Festival probably, almost 15 years ago? But we always had gay representation, and we always had speakers who talked about it. So, of course, that was in fact, we had one board member who quit because of it. But a long time ago.
Over the years, you've developed this relationship with the community. What do you think is the most important part about coming to the Cinema Arts Center to see a film with everyone in the community, and why is that important?
When I see the people who have continued coming, there are some times when I'll hear somebody at the staff say, "Oh my God, look at how long it's taken that person just to who's using a cane or a walker just to get to the box office." And I always say, listen, when you get to be that age and you have as good a taste as they do, I'll then be ready to hear what you have to complain about. But I think people have grown up with the cinema. Quite amazing. The amount of members, I know people say, oh, you got a lot of old people here. And I say, well, they've been here all these years and they've grown up with the cinema and it has meant so much to them. And I'm always pleased when I see these older members, bringing their kids, because I know this is the generation that we have to really nurture. There are a lot of younger people who are finding us and feeling also very strongly about the connection. They feel somehow, and I've had especially women who will say they don't feel uncomfortable coming alone, because I think people are so accustomed to feeling they have to go to places in couples, but they can come alone and feel very comfortable, and not, and also they feel very comfortable about their kids being here. When we've done kids' films and they've left their kids, they feel it's a safe place. And I don't think that has just come about by accident. I think there's a camaraderie that has grown up here. And even people who are just starting out coming, and they're not old, they're in their maybe 20s and 30s and 40s and up, I think they sense this kind of camaraderie, this communication that they have, or this connection that they feel. And yesterday you mentioned it. There were 4 groups of card player and mahjong players,
Right.
and I thought people find their way here, and they know that they're going to be very welcome. And we, sometimes there are people who complain because it's a bit noisy. I think there is this sense of a I hate to keep using the word community, but I think they feel not only are they going to find experience in new films, old films, but they're going to find a connection that they miss, I think, when they, as Vicky used to say, they don't have that turnstile experience. You walk in, you walk out. You're here, and you can experience something special. So I think that's the things people mostly feel. And when I'm watching a film with an audience that is really, I can tell, they're really getting it, whatever it is. There's a very, because you had asked about how the programming part of it is done. I watch a lot of films that we don't do. And when we choose films, I'm always worried that people will like the same films that we do. And luckily, we've been really successful with that people have really responded well.
I just want to thank you so much for sitting down and talking about this. I'm so
It's a
lucky.
pleasure.
Oh, I'm glad.
It really is.
It's funny because I was thinking I get a chance to talk to you every day almost.
Yeah.
And now we're going to sit down and talk some more. But I heard things that I hadn't heard in all my time here. And it's just wonderful. And I just feel lucky to be sitting down with you.
I thank you for saying that because, I always worry sometimes that, I have certain remembrances about the beginning of the cinema. My God, it's 43 years. And I'm saying, does anybody really care that much about the involvement of, what happened over 43 years? Because everyone knows that this is a kind of cinema that sometimes doesn't last. Because, you don't always do the popular stuff. You're not doing Batman. Not that we don't ever do Batman, but, you're not doing what's the big blockbusters. And can we survive, especially in this climate of where people can see a film on their wristwatch, So
Right.
Can we continue? So they were like astonished at this, they feel 10 years was a lot. And it's true, not too many cinemas over the years have survived. So we feel very, very lucky.
And I mean, I think that's part of why we are able to evolve and thrive, is because it was founded on the idea of the community being engaged and the community being part of what's happening here, and that being like a central element. And that's really, kind of key to our longevity and our remaining relevant.
It was Vic who really always pushed the membership. He felt that the membership was at the heart. Because if you get the commitment of a membership, then you're not so likely to have 1 or 2 or 3 or 10, even 20 complaints make a difference.
Right.
But the membership makes it strong, and that he was absolutely right.
And now we have 10,500 members, and they support with their membership every year, and many of them choose to make an additional non-membership gift for the annual campaign, which we named for Vic in 2010, the Vic Skolnick Life for the Cinema campaign. It was the perfect tribute, really, because he was always saying, how do we get people more engaged in the life of the cinema?
Yeah.
So I just want to close by saying that we want to ask all of our members and patrons, what's the difference between seeing a movie here in your community cinema and seeing a movie at home or anywhere else? And we're asking you, our members and patrons, to make a difference by giving a fully tax-deductible non-membership contribution to our annual campaign this year, the Vic Skolnick Life of the Cinema campaign.
Bravo.
Thank you again, Shar.
Thank you.
Excellent.